Hi, everyone. I'm here with Terry Giles, author of The 15%, which comes out on March 10th. We're in the Skyhorse Publishing offices. So welcome, Terry.
It's great to be here.
Great to have you. So I'm going to jump right in and start asking you some questions.
Sure.
Why did you decide to write the book, and why now?
You know, when I was representing 150 of the 800 victims of what they called the predator priest cases in California, those were the cases against the Catholic Church, we had to do a psychiatric profile of each of our clients.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it really interesting when I was talking to the psychologists and psychiatrists who are experts, that they said that when you go through a serious hardship, 85% of the time, it will pretty much it can destroy your life. It'll definitely make your life more miserable. But for some reason, in 15% of the cases, a person comes through it and they're stronger and better than they would have been had they not gone through the hardship to begin with. And then a couple of years later, I've been involved in the scholarship program at Horatio Alger Association for 26 years now. And we are now the largest need-based scholarship program in the country.
Wow.
But we get about 40,000 applications for 2,500 scholarships. And these kids are all kids that are real Horatio Alger stories. I mean, some really terrible things, you know, where dad kills mom, dad goes to prison, they're raised by the state, basically. And but we have to be careful because a lot of those kids, when they get to school, they don't do well, they drop out. They have a lot of stability issues. And so what we're trying to do is to pick kids and give the scholarships that will go on and do great things in their life, hopefully. So we asked them, what are we looking for?
All right.
And without any pause at all, they said 15%. And so that's really what got me thinking about it. And then finally I began to do some research on why is this?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that causes 15% to be able to pull themselves out of these hardships and actually have a better life because it happened to them? And I began to sort of figure out, again, based on the science, what those elements are. And then the question became, is it part of their DNA? I mean, are they just lucky enough to be born with these ingredients in them? Is it luck?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they skills that can be learned? And that got me excited, because if there's skills that can be learned, then why limit ourselves to 15%? What if word got out about how to move through hardships in a real way, and we no longer dealt with 15%, it was the 25% or the 50% or the 75%? Wouldn't the world be a better place?
Yeah.
If we could get there?
Wow, excellent. You kind of did describe this, but what does the 15% mean, and why did you choose it as a title for your book?
Well, actually, I was at my home in Puerto Vallarta with a friend who has written a number of books, and we just got into a discussion, and I started talking about the 15% and all this that happened. He says, "Wow, that sounds like a great book." And quite honestly, that's how it happened.
Wow.
That actually gave me the idea and the title all in one fell swoop. So
It's a fantastic title. In chapter 2 of the book, you talk about how a low fear factor contributed to your success. What does this mean, and how can someone build up their fearlessness?
yeah, you know, it's really an interesting thing. They did a bunch of studies in London during World War II. And basically what happened is Churchill and all of his folks were really worried that when the Nazis would begin to bomb London, people would move out of the city. They'd move out in the country, it would kill the economy, it would be a mess. That the bombing would scare everybody in a very negative way. But something very interesting happened. When the bombing occurred, if it killed you, well, you're dead, and you know, that's the way it is. But those who didn't get killed actually were almost giddy about the fact that they survived the bombing. They saw it as a real positive. They saw it as them being, tough and resilient. And it turned out, when they studied it, it's called a near miss. And that if in life you can experience a near miss, it actually makes you braver, takes away some of the fear factor, because you realize that just because something sounds dangerous or something sounds unusual, it doesn't mean that it is. But in the manner of let's say business or in leading your life, I would say having a low fear factor means living life on the other side of your comfort zone. We all have a comfort zone on what we're willing to do, and it's different for everybody. But when you start to extend yourself past that comfort zone, that takes courage. And the amazing thing is, if people do it, and once they experience it, and once they start to see truly miracles happen in their life, then they become very positive. They become very excited about it. And not unlike the folks in London with the bombing. It's really interesting. It carries over.
That is really interesting, and I totally agree. Once you find you're okay outside of your comfort zone,
Right.
you feel better about doing the things that might have scared you
Exactly.
before. I like that a lot. What does it mean to be an underdog, and how has being an underdog helped you create lasting success?
Well, everybody goes through hardships at some point in their life. For some, it's maybe a little more difficult than others. But most of the time, if you're going through hardship, especially when you're young, I was born very poor. I was raised in a small town in Missouri at the foot of the Ozarks. My dad had come back from World War II, and I was born in 1948, and my mom was 18 years old at the time. But he had a bad alcohol problem from the war, and it extended throughout most of his life until probably the last 15 or 20 years of his life. So he would disappear for months at a time, and then he was actually incarcerated in Arizona. And I had to end up moving a lot. I had grandparents both in Missouri and in Arizona. We also ended up in California, and I changed schools 21 times
Wow.
by the 10th grade in 3 different states. So it was that moving around all the time that probably created a lot of the difficulties for me. At the time, I saw it as difficulties. Back in those days, nobody cared about bullies. And if you were a boy, every time you changed schools, you had to figure out how to deal with the bullies. Eventually, I figured out that, talking my way out of trouble hurt a lot less than fighting. Not all those bullies are like Spuds in the Christmas Story.
Right.
Some of them actually are pretty tough. And actually, I think a lot of my negotiation skills were starting to be formed back then. Also, it developed a low fear factor in me from the standpoint of changing careers, changing locations. When I met my second wife, it meant I had to move out of California, where I was really entrenched, to Houston, Texas. But it was like no big deal. I'd moved so much of my life
Right.
that it was pretty easy.
Have you ever been paralyzed by fear?
Yeah, one time, and I think it was the near miss for me. And one of the fun things about doing the book was when I could look at what the elements are to move into the 15%, then I could go back in my life and see, where did that happen? This isn't really an autobiography as much as it is using some aspects of my life, kind of like a lab rat, what worked, what didn't
Right.
work, that kind of thing. And when I was 8 years old, in 3rd grade in Cuba, Missouri, we had a very close call on a tornado. We had tornado warnings a lot, but this one was serious. In fact, they had emptied out the school. They told everybody to go home. Kids got on their bikes and rode home. Parents came to pick them up. I didn't have a bike. We lived about 3 or 4 miles away from the school, and my dad had the car, and he had been gone for a couple of months. So my mom was at the house with our little sister, a little house that we were renting. And I was finally the last kid there, and there were a couple of teachers sitting around, and then they, hard to believe now in today's world, but they said, well, you know, Terry, you're just going to have to get home because we got to get home to our families. Of course,
yeah, no, that wouldn't happen now.
As I put in the book, that was in an era where they told us we'd survive a nuclear attack by hiding under our desks, too. So I had to walk home, and part of it was a paved road, and then a dirt road, and then I would cut through a forest area. And the tornado got very close enough that I thought it was going to hit. And if you've ever been in one of those situations, it's like it sucks all the air out of the atmosphere. It's like no movement of air. All the animals have gone into hiding. It gets very dark, almost like a solar eclipse of the sun. And I was scared to death. And I began to think about a place to hide, you know, a ditch or the hollow of a tree, because, you know, I grew up as a kid with people saying, you know, tornadoes will take you and slam you in a concrete building or drive you through a telephone pole. I was very scared. And then something told me, look, the only way I'm going to get home, because my mom and my sister are there, I'm worried about them. The only way I'm going to get home is I'm going to have to do it myself. And it just putting one foot in front of the other to get home. And I got there, and she was at the front door holding my sister's baby in a blanket, ready to go and dive out in the ditch in the front. And I don't know if my mom sensed anything different in me, but there's no question that I was a different person. And I've even used, you know, it's funny, I hadn't related it until I started writing the book, but my whole life, when I would have to do something that was a bit difficult, first time I went into a courtroom, when I reported for basic training in the Army, I had this little saying I would say in my head, and that is, lean forward and hope your feet keep up with you before your face hits the ground.
That's a good saying.
I used that when I would start a new business, and that was my expression for overcoming fear. But in reality, it was that near miss when I was 8 years old that I think planted the seed. And that was one of those things that, while it was horrifying at the time, was a very, very lucky thing to have happened to me.
It seems like resilience plays a big part in the 15%.
There's no question.
What would you say makes a person resilient?
Well, look, everybody has hardship. And when they have a hardship in their life, everybody, I don't care who you are, you have a tendency to say, why me? But what you can't do is you can't get stuck there. If you get stuck in why me, you begin to see yourself as a victim.
Right.
You talk about yourself as a victim, you act like you're a victim, and you get locked into victimhood. And then the next bad thing that can happen to you is you start to feel sorry for yourself. And the worst thing that can happen is you start to get off on other people feeling sorry for you. And now you're probably stuck in a very permanent way. Unless somebody really shakes you out of it, it's going to be hard to be to have a successful, happy, joyful life. The 15% also say, why me? But then they begin to move through it.
Right.
I've often said when I've had a failure in business or other things, look, I don't want to act like it didn't happen.
Right.
In fact, that's where the best lessons are learned. In fact, I want to feel the pain. Okay, bring on the pain. I'm going to embrace that pain. I'm going to remember what this feels like because I don't want to ever go through this again. And then it's time to move on. You got to put it in the background, and you got to move forward, and you've got to move on. and you examine. And when you do that, you start to examine what happened and actually learn valuable lessons from it. And that's why the 15% move through hardship and become more powerful. They become more skillful. They actually become a better person because they went through the hardship, as strange as and as ironic as that sounds.
Yeah, I feel like one of the big lessons in the book is you may not like what happened to you,
Oh, yeah.
but you need to accept it and move through it and keep going and learn from it.
It's absolutely true. You know, I've had, besides the practice of law, I've had 35 companies during my career. I wish all 35 were successful, but they weren't. And I found that sometimes if I had several successes in a row, actually I'd start to feel bulletproof. Like, boy, I got this down pat.
Right.
And that's when I take one to the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually the losses. It was actually the failures where you learn the most lessons, and it helps to build up resiliency, just as you were saying. But you know, if you just test your resiliency, get through one event that's a hardship, but you come out the other side and you realize, wow, I was able to pop out of that. You see that as sort of a mini miracle in your life. And now you're more positive, you're more in alignment to be able to get through the next one, and the next one, and the next one, because that's what life is. Life is a series of lessons. And
It sure
winning
is.
wouldn't mean anything if we didn't have losing
It's
to go
true.
along with it.
Yeah, I can really relate to that completely. I think that's a relatable lesson for anyone. Let's see. Let's take a question from here. What made you decide to leave a successful career at the firm you built to become an entrepreneur?
Well, I tell this story, and it's I wanted to be a criminal defense lawyer from the time I was in 5th grade. I seemed to always do better in oral book reports or oral reports, and teachers always gave me good grades on those. And my mom would reinforce that. My mom, what an amazing lady. There were many times in her early life where you would not think she would be a positive person, but somewhere along the line she read Norman Vincent Peale's book, The Power of Positive Thinking. It was the first book I remember. I'm not sure I read it, but she read it to me when I was 8 or 9 years old. And then Mom would, every night when I would go to bed, she'd take my hand and she would read my palm. Now, she couldn't read palms at all, but she'd say, oh, this is your success line, and you're going to be a really powerful lawyer. And she would tell me all these things about my hand. And, you know, it's your mom, so you're believing her. So she constantly told me that's what I was going to do. And then, of course, I was always watching Perry Mason and Owen Marshall and all the lawyer shows on TV. And it just seemed like something I would do. So when I came out of law school, I started my own firm. And within 5.5 years, we had 35 lawyers, over 100 employees, making 600 criminal court appearances a month. By the time I'd been in the practice 8 years, we were the largest criminal defense firm in California. And in 8.5 years, I tried 90 cases to verdict, including 13 murders and 3 death penalty cases. And then there was Fred Douglas. Fred was accused of being behind the murder of 9 women in Orange County, California. And, you know, we got a little lucky with some of the evidence and with the way things went in the trial. And I got Fred acquitted, and then 6 months later he killed 2 more girls. And I guess I was starting to get a little disenchanted. I'd become a criminal defense lawyer because I thought it was like TV. I'd represent all innocent people. And you do represent some innocent people, but the truth is most of the folks you represent at least did something wrong. It may not be everything the DA charged them with, but it's something. But with Fred Douglass, that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. I had to ask myself, why is the world a better place? Because I do what I do for a living, and I didn't like the answer to that. And then I was faced with the reality that the firm, this big operation, was actually worth nothing if I left it, so I couldn't even sell my interest in the firm. Not really, because I was the one who was bringing in most of the business. And in fact, within 6 months, the firm had broken up. And so there were a couple of big lessons for me. First of all, this is what I really wanted to do, and I got everything I asked for. I was living in the big house on the hill, making lots of money, in the paper all the time. It was very heady stuff. And now I wasn't going to do it anymore. And that's all I had prepared myself to do. So what am I going to do next? And then it occurred to me, you know what? You built a business here. This is a real enterprise. You had employees, you had insurance policies for your people, you had you had to worry about all of the things you'd have to worry about in a business. I was just simply selling my personal services. But why couldn't I do this with a product? And how great it would be, if a bus ran over me in a crosswalk, the business didn't lose any value at all.
Right.
Then you're really building something, not what I had done. It was kind of like a house on sand with the law office, because once I wasn't there, it wasn't worth anything. And so that's when I decided I quit, turned the firm over to the other folks in the firm, and I decided to embark on my business career. And that's how it happened, really.
Amazing story. I'm super impressed with all of that, because I know for myself, I take a lot of advice you give in the book to heart, because I've done so much in my career too.
That's nice, thank you.
Yeah, and have had faced adversity and have been the underdog, and I just find it truly relatable on every level.
That's great.
I'm just going to remind everyone that you can get a signed copy of the book at premiercollectibles.com/Giles, Giles. What surprised you about writing this book?
How cathartic it was. I had to actually go back and examine some things I did that maybe I wasn't so proud of. My first marriage being one of those. It allowed me to, I think it was important in the book for people to understand that as you move through hardship, it's not all perfect, You can get where you want to be, and life can be anything you want it to be, but it's like a graph of a good stock. It's up and some downs and ups and downs and ups and downs. And I think if I can be so bold as to say it, that I've grown a lot as a human being over my lifetime, especially after the failure of my first marriage. And so it allowed me to really examine that and some other mistakes I made. When you're a trial lawyer, you can make a lot of enemies. So there's everybody who you're trying those cases against who's not really a fan of yours. And so it allowed me to go back and maybe clean up some of the things that I did wrong. But to do it in a way that hopefully would be helpful to others, that they wouldn't maybe make those same mistakes. It's really easy to do what I did and then become such a workaholic, to be so interested in your businesses and your companies that you forget about your family. And fortunately, my first wife couldn't have children, so we didn't have children that were impacted. But she was a sweet, wonderful woman, and I was a hard-charging, narcissistic jerk. And so you have to confront those things as well.
Yeah, and that can't be easy sometimes. um, what did you learn from working on a political campaign? Because you worked on Ben Carson's 2016 campaign, that you think the candidates today should know?
Well, the title of the chapter about the Ben Carson campaign is Mistakes Worth Making. So a lot of people have asked me, why in the world would your first journey into politics be trying to run a presidential campaign? That's probably a pretty good question. I was excited about it because I liked Ben. I thought that Ben's life is the epitome of the 15%. I mean, Ben's in the 1%. What he's done and what's happened to him is extraordinary. And I just felt his whole story was a great example for all youth from any culture. Mm-hmm. And so I was excited about that. And I honestly think if some things had gone differently and he had been elected, he would have been sort of the anti-Trump. By that, what I mean is, I think he would have been inclined to go after a lot of the same policies that President Trump had done, but he'd probably be a little bit, maybe a little kinder, more gentler version. Now, maybe that wouldn't have worked, too. I mean, maybe the world and politics is, boy, a pretty hateful environment. Maybe you've just got to be a certain way in order to survive it. I don't know. But I think the thing that bothered me the most are what I call the politicos. And those are the people that move from campaign to campaign to campaign, because they're mostly interested in making money. I had heard that Romney, I don't know that this was true, but when I was preparing for 2016, I'd heard that in 2012, Romney had 50 consultants that made more than $1 million in his campaign. And when you think about you're raising money from all these people, grandma is sending in $25 and that kind of thing, to see it get wasted like that, I just thought was a really difficult thing. But once you get into a campaign, you realize that you also need the politicos, because they bring with them the ground forces. And if they see your operation as being sort of a here today but maybe gone tomorrow, man, they descend on you like hyenas. And in Ben's situation, you had the campaign, and then we had to develop a super PAC. Unless you're a billionaire, as Elizabeth Warren is now finding out, you have to have a super PAC along with your campaign. You just can't compete otherwise. But I wanted to try to set up both, but the law says I can't do it at the same time. So when I set up the campaign, when he announced, I then left to go over and do the super PAC. But when you do that, the law says I can't communicate with anybody in the campaign for 120 days. I actually violate the law. I can communicate to Ben, but nobody else, nobody in the campaign. And I thought I had enough safeguards over there so that we could get the benefit, the 85% that you need from the politicos. Funny, it's 85-15 again, but it's sort of the reverse of it. And not the 15% that is just every negative character trait you can imagine, lack of loyalty, greed, just really awful human beings. And unfortunately, during that period of time, they unraveled the people I had over there and really took advantage of the campaign. And by the time I could get back, well, I'll tell you how bad it was. I think I know those numbers don't mean much today, but in 2016, $65 million still was a lot of money. Campaign raised $65 million, and by the time they got to Iowa, it was the first caucus, they only had $2.5 million in the bank.
Wow.
That's how these folks will take you apart if you let them. So it was, I would say it was pretty much a negative for me, because I'd spent a year and a half before Ben announced planning it, etc. But the other side of that is I got to deal with the best political think tanks in the country. I mean, they opened the doors for presidential campaigns. And I got to actually look at writing policy manuals for how we could handle some of the issues that we were facing, be it student debt or whatever it might be. And so while being in the campaign ended up having sort of some real significant negatives for me, the truth is that there were some amazing positives and amazing things that I learned along the way. That's why I entitled the chapter Mistakes Worth Making. It was a mistake to get involved in politics, but it was worth giving it a try.
That is excellent advice, though. So I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into politics.
Okay. That's always a dangerous area to go.
You mentioned tribalism and political tribes in your chapter about leading and eventually leaving Ben Carson's campaign, which we talked about. Leading up to Super Tuesday, what sort of similarities or differences do you see in today's Democratic candidates, specifically Bernie Sanders?
Well, first of all, I would say this. I think Senator Sanders has done an excellent job. He's been doing it for a while, but he's done an excellent job of getting people who are involved with him, his politicos, aren't just folks that are there every cycle.
Right.
These are people that are passionate about him, and they're passionate about his views. Whether you like his views or not, the people that are working for him love him. And as a result, they're not taking advantage of him. And as a result, he's raising a lot of money, and he's using the money the way the money should be used. So he has developed an excellent team. So he's got the ground troops, he's got the money, he's got passion behind him, he's got a certain element of the Democratic Party that's going to go for him no matter what, I think. And I don't know what that number is. You know, I can listen to the talking heads like everybody else, but it seems to be a pretty solid 20 to 25%. So he's got an awful lot going for him. Now, I think it's going to be difficult for somebody who labels themselves a socialist to get elected in the United States in 2020. But who knows? I don't think anybody gave Trump a chance of being elected either. So you never know. I am not certain that he will be, he's a very effective campaigner. I'm not sure, even if he gets elected, he's then going to have to get a majority of the House and a majority of the Senate, whoever they are, to be willing to play. And he may run into a lot of problems within his own party. Trump did initially. That's why in the first 2 years they had the House, the Senate, the presidency, and they didn't get anything done because there were still people not happy with Trump, even on the Republican side.
Right.
Eventually, by however you want to do it, he's gotten people in alignment, and so they're much more effective now as a party. But Bernie is going to have that same problem, I think, at least initially, with obviously with the Republicans, but certainly with people in his own party. But you know what? The other thing I would say about him, and there's a lot about Bernie Sanders' policies I don't like, okay? So I'm really just talking about the campaign. I'm not trying to get in, you know, I think turning the entire health system over to the government, going to a doctor would be like going to the DMV, and we all know what that experience is like. So I'm not in favor of that. But he's got passion, and he's loyal to his views. You know, he hasn't changed. And I really regard and respect that. I don't have to agree with him. I'm not going to agree all the way with any politician that's out there. But boy, I have a lot of respect for somebody who this is their belief and they stick with it. Ronald Reagan had a lot of that quality. And Sanders hasn't changed. He's consistent, and you gotta admire that. So I think the Democratic Party is going to be in the same kind of struggle that the Republican Party was in 2016 with Trump.
I tend to agree with you on that. Let's take another question from here. What was the most interesting fact that you learned while writing the book?
Oh boy. You know, I never really thought of myself as being a good writer or being funny in my writing. Everything I've ever done has been based on oral presentation. So trial lawyer, well, oral presentation has worked for me in the courtroom and the boardroom. And I went to college on a debate scholarship, and so it's all been oral for me. And as a result, basically in the practice of law, I hired people to write the briefs. I thought, boy, having to sit down and do research and write the briefs just sounded horrible to me. But it turned out that was one of the most enjoyable things for me in the book, and that was a surprise to me.
Really?
Yeah, I thought that would be the hard part, and it turned out to be the really fun part of the book. And I don't know. You never know. I'm nervous about reviews. So far, they've been pretty good, and I have to say this. I don't want this to come off wrong, but I'm really proud of what I had to say, and even the way I said it. And I didn't know that would happen. In fact, if anything, I probably would have. If it were on the big board in Vegas, I would have bet against it.
Here's an interesting one. Tell readers about some of your mentors over the years and what you learned from them.
Boy. In the law, I worked in the public defender's office when I was in law school. And there were a couple of lawyers there that were incredible. And they really did. They were tough. Boy, and they scared the heck out of me, but I learned a lot from them, and they really helped mentor me there. In business, I've been very lucky. I've not been afraid to ask people to help me. So when you're going to be involved in a lot of different enterprises, you kind of need that. When I bought an automobile dealership, a Toyota store, I didn't know a lot about that, so I had to talk to people who did and ask for help. When I was involved in buying real estate in Germany, I had a wonderful man in Germany who sort of took me under his arm and really mentored me and led me in some terrific ways. I'd been investing heavily over there, and then the wall came down, and wow, I thought everything was just going to go crazy, and just the opposite. He told me, Terry, you got to get out of everything as fast as you can. And I said, why would I want to do that? He says, because we're going to take over East Germany, and Germany's going to pass laws that'll force investment in the East and it'll kill investment in the West. He was exactly right.
Wow.
And fortunately, I took his advice. So every step along the way, I've asked for help, and I've had people that were kind enough and generous enough to give me that help. I've had so many mentors, it's unbelievable. But mostly it's because I wasn't afraid to ask for help. A lot of people, I think asking for help is like a sign of weakness.
Exactly.
But for whatever reason, I never saw it that way. Maybe because it scared me with the practice of law, but after I was successful in the practice of law, as I would go into anything else, I already had a certain amount of success and a certain resume that said who I was. So it became easier as it went down the road. It got easier and easier because people knew I had success in my life, and so they just felt good that I wanted their input. But that starts somewhere. You don't start out that way.
Right.
And you got to feel comfortable doing it, for whatever reason I did.
So do you feel like the 15% has that quality of asking for help?
No question about it. I belong to the Horatio Alger Association. Norman Vincent Peale started the association in 1948 as a tribute to his power of positive thinking. It's an interesting thing, since my mom read me that book when I was 8 years old. And every year, 10 Americans get the award. And they are folks that have had Horatio Alger type, it's called that because of the author in the 1900s who wrote Rag to Riches, American Success Stories. Now, a lot of the people in there have come from rags to riches, but it's also people who have basically come out of real adversity and been successful. So we have, wonderful ministers, and we have ex-presidents, and we have military people, we have athletes, and we have a lot of folks in the organization. And 10 get awarded each year. Now about 10 die each other year. So overall it stays to be about 240 members at any one time. Well, every one of these people, every one of them came from nothing. And every one of them will tell you that somebody offered them a hand. At least one hand went out to help them climb that ladder. And in most cases, it was multiple people who assisted them. And every one of those folks is grateful and thankful to those people who reached out and helped them up.
Sure, I imagine so.
So I think absolutely that is something you learn. One of the lessons you learn is you can't do it all yourself.
Right.
You need help.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see, we'll take another one here. What are the characteristics of someone who's a 15%er?
Well, there's a number of things that I think that they develop. We talked about low fear factor, and we talked about sort of living outside your comfort zone. One of the things that I don't think people automatically focus on is the power of words. Words are an amazing thing. Words make us laugh, they make us cry, they bring us great joy, they can bring us misery. Words are very, very powerful amongst the human race. And I really learned that by working for Disneyland. They have an entire vocabulary there. When I was working my way through college, I was a skipper on the Jungle Cruise. And you don't have a uniform. It's your costume. You don't go out to the job site. You go on stage. Maybe the most important word they introduce to you is you don't have clients or customers of Disneyland. These are guests.
Yes.
It's funny. It's just a simple word. But when you start to look at folks that you're dealing with as guests, it changes everything. So at the law office, that's how I wanted our staff to handle our folks. So now some of these people had done some pretty dastardly things, but they come into the office, they're to be treated with respect and with dignity. They were guests in our home, which was the law office. When they would come into my office, I treated them that way. I wanted everybody else to do that as well. When I had the dealership, hey, these aren't clients that we're just trying to sell cars to for the highest price.
Right.
These are guests. So we had a play area for the kids with a nice lady in there to take care of the kids so the parents could really concentrate on the cars. I made sure that all the salesmen wore suits and ties. I wouldn't let them wear sunglasses, even though we were in sunny Southern California. I wanted them to be able to look their customer in the eye. We were not any kind of high pressure. And when I bought that dealership in '83, we were selling 35 cars a month, and out of 1,200 Toyota dealerships in the United States, we were at number 1,150. When I sold it in 1987, we were the fifth largest Toyota store in the world, selling over 1,100 cars a month.
Wow.
And I believe a lot of it had to do with the quality of the car, and a lot of it had to do with the fact that the yen in those days was 250 to 1. So we had probably the best car for the best price, but a lot of it had to do with the comfort that people felt.
Yeah.
When I owned the bank, you know, back in those days, people weren't doing banking over our computers or our iPads, and so generally, a business would send in their key individual, their key secretary or key administrative staff member who would bring the money in and deposit it, etc. And you know, we made a real effort to get to know those people. And lots of banks, you know, would have donuts out there and, you know, coffee. But we actually invested in real coffee mugs that we put their initials on. So they had their own mug. And I know that sounds completely corny, but I have to tell you, that was a huge success in the bank.
I'd like that.
And so we had folks that come in and do their banking. We had couches set up in the lobby, and they'd sit in the lobby and chat with. They'd see each other there all the time. I mean, it became a real interesting situation. So over and over again, I've used the guest terminology to great advantage. So, and listen, power of words also is important on what you're saying to yourself.
Right.
You know, I'm not just talking about the words we use to others. You know, we have words going on in our head all the time. And boy, it's important that those words are positive, that those words speak not of victimhood,
Right.
those words speak of resiliency, and I can do it, and I've learned these lessons. So the power of words can make up the individual.
Well, so far you're ticking off all the boxes for me. I'd bank with you, I'd want you as my lawyer, and I'd buy a car from you. So you're doing something.
Well, that's pretty
right.
good. That's pretty good. If only I knew you back then.
What was your first job?
My first job was paperboy. Best job in the world. I really hated that in the world today, there aren't paperboys anymore. There are people who, you know, adults who have pickup trucks that deliver the papers. I'll tell you what was so great about being a paperboy is you had your own business.
Yeah.
You bought the papers from the company, and they delivered them at 4 o'clock in the morning, and you had to get out there and wrap them up. And if it was raining too bad, you put plastic on them, and you still had to put them on the bags on your bike, and you had to deliver them. And you better deliver them well, because at the end of the month you got to go around and collect.
Yep.
And you know what? You had people move. I delivered mostly in neighborhoods where I lived, so it was mostly apartment buildings. Well, people move. They didn't leave a check for the paperboy. So, you know, you realize the good and the bad about all of these things. And at least in those days, if you did it right, you worked like crazy and you could clear about $42 a month. But that was big money in those days for a young kid. And so that was my first job, and it was a great job. And, you know, the sad part about it today is when my son was 12 years old or 10 years old, if I'd made him get on his bike and ride around Houston at 4 o'clock in the morning, social services probably would have had me arrested.
You're right. Here's a good one. Do you have any hidden talents?
Probably not. If I have any talents, I pretty much get them out there for everybody to see. So
Thankfully for us.
I don't keep any talents are wasted if they're hidden. You know, the truth is, honestly, I have been very, very fortunate. I consider myself to be a pretty average person. I think I'm average. I probably have an average IQ. I think on everything I know, there was nothing in my background or my family's background. I was the first one from either side of the family to ever go to college. There was nothing really extraordinary about me. maybe just my will to fight through it all, and catching some really lucky breaks that I now realize there's skills that could be learned if you had somebody to teach them to you, but when you don't, then it's either got to be built into you or you got to be lucky enough to have it happen to you, like that tornado when I was 8.
Right.
But yeah, I wish I was a good golfer. That's what I really wish.
I don't know. I think your hidden talent might be writing really good books.
Well, we'll see.
And you didn't know it. What is the last book you read?
You know, the New Girl is a book that I'm actually in the middle of reading, and it's fictional, but it's really based. It's one of those fictional books that's sort of based on real events, and it has to do with the Khashoggi murder and the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, and it's really a very, very good book. But my 2 favorite authors, it's very unusual for me to read fiction. I like nonfiction best, and every book they've written I've read, and that's Malcolm Gladwell and Michael Lewis. Both of them are just, I'm a huge fan, and my favorite book from each of them, from Mr. Gladwell, it was David and Goliath, and for Mr. Lewis, it was The Undoing Project. Now, I love all their books, but those are my 2 favorite.
That was my next question. What's your favorite book? Do you have a guilty pleasure?
You know, we have 2 hotels in Europe, 5-star hotels, and we have a Michelin star restaurant in each one. I really love to eat. And I have to really watch it. I'll tell you, I've probably always been a little bit overweight, but I could be really overweight if I let it go, because I love eating.
So do I. I can't blame you for that.
And a good wine.
Yes, that too. What is the last movie you saw in theaters?
You know, the last one I saw in the theater was the war movie about the islands that we defended. I'm trying to think of the name of it. I can't think of it. It's a recent movie, and it's 1917. No, it's not 1917. It's World War II. Battle of Midway. Really good. But the last movie I saw was on an airplane 2 days ago, and it was really an unusual movie. I got a big kick out of it, and if you told me what the plot was going to be, I would have said I'd never enjoy that movie. And that's Jojo Rabbit.
I knew you were going to say that.
It is really an offbeat little movie, but actually brought out all sorts of emotions in me that were a surprise.
You're the second person in the last 3 days that has told me that.
Is that right?
Yeah, the last person told me that he cried a little bit.
Yeah, I did too, actually. I did too, yeah. It's really a sweet movie and some great acting in that movie.
Who's the most interesting person you've met recently?
A guy by the name of J.P. McManus. J.P. is maybe the richest guy in Ireland, certainly one of them. He's a billionaire, self-made billionaire. Made his money initially through gambling. He really knew how to handicap the horses. Now he raises thoroughbreds. He owns huge resorts in the Bahamas. But my favorite hotel in the world is called Adair Manor outside of Limerick. If you were going to fly into Ireland, you go into Shannon. It's about a 45-minute drive. It was incredible before, but JP bought it, and I don't know, put $200 or $300 million into it. In fact, they're going to host the Ryder Cup in 2026, and so getting to know J.P. McManus, he's one of the most humble, incredible people you'd ever want to meet. You would have no way of knowing that this guy is if you met him on the street, that he is near as wealthy as he is. He doesn't play up his wealth at all, and yet what he creates is unbelievable beauty. In fact, I saw where Condé Nast is now ranked at Dare Manor, the #1 hotel in the world, and it's 840 acres of nothing but pristine.
Wow.
It's incredible. I encourage everybody to go
Yeah,
there.
really. Let's see. What cause is dear to your heart?
Scholarship. I'm vice chairman of the board of regents at Pepperdine University. All of the money that we give there goes into various scholarships. I've been involved deeply with the scholarship program at Horatio Alger. We're very committed to scholarship there. Our personal foundation is used probably 80% for scholarships. So scholarship, helping young people get a college education that they might not otherwise get because of, for whatever reason, student debt, inability to pay, whatever you want to call it, is something that Callie and I really enjoy doing.
That's amazing, and a great point to wrap up on. Terry, thank you for being here. It was fascinating hearing everything you had to say. I just want to remind people you can go to premiercollectibles.com/Giles, Giles, to get a signed copy. And thank you. This was great.
Thank you. I appreciate it.